I was halfway down the M3 with the deed to a 380 pounds, 000 house on the passenger seat, when my husband rang to tell me his mother didn't want me at her birthday. If you've ever had your place in a family ripped away in one sentence, you might want to grab a cuppa and sit with me for this. Because what started as a snub at a birthday party ended with prison sentences and a very different version of happily ever after. And if you're new here and this already feels uncomfortably familiar, you can stay. I'm talking to you. It was a gray Sunday. That sort of low cloud that presses on your skull. My little Ford hummed along the motorway. Boot full of party food. Backseat loaded with gift bags and a helium-78 balloon bobbing sadly against the roof lining. The most important thing sat in a stiff brown envelope by my hand, the signed deed to a neat detached house with rose bushes and a level drive. Eleanor's house. My gift. My great gesture of belonging. My grandmother had died 6 months earlier and left me more money than I knew what to do with. Do something meaningful with it, she'd said in the will, as if she knew I'd try to give it away. So I'd poured a big chunk of it into a house for Eleanor, because for 25 years, I'd listened to her stories about struggling on her pension, about damp, about drafty windows and council tax and how she hated to be a burden. You'd have liked the house. Cream render, slate roof, small garden, walking distance to the village shop. I'd spent weeks arguing with estate agents, chasing solicitors, checking searches, all so I could hand her those keys at her birthday lunch and finally be seen as proper family, not the daughter-in-law, not the outsider, someone who had done something extraordinary for Mum. The phone buzzed in the cup holder. Tom. I grinned, already picturing Eleanor's face. "Hi, love," I said, hitting speaker. He didn't bother with hello. Turn round. His voice was tight, like he'd sprinted upstairs. "Mum doesn't want you here." It took me a second to process the words. I actually laughed. "Don't be daft. I'm 5 minutes away." "No. Listen." A pause. I could hear a murmur of voices behind him. The clink of crockery. "We're having a family meeting before the lunch. Mum's adamant. Blood family only. Blood family." My hands clenched on the steering wheel. A lorry roared past, and the car shuddered in its wake. "Tom," I said slowly, "I've been married to you for 25 years. I know. But James agrees. It's just easier if you've ever had someone try to erase you from your own life in real time. You'll know that fizzy, sick feeling you get behind your ribs. Tell me in the comments if you've had that moment where you suddenly realize you rank below the furniture. I always wonder how many of us there are. I've got her present in the car," I said. I didn't mention the word house. I'd rehearsed that reveal, planned it. James filming on his phone, Eleanor pretending not to cry, me finally inside the warm circle of the story they told about themselves. I've spent days cooking mags. Please, just turn round. We'll explain later. Come for pudding or something. Mum doesn't want outsiders for this bit. Outsiders. The word sat between us, heavy as a brick. I flicked the indicator and moved into the left-hand lane, more out of habit than obedience. On the slip road, I pulled into the services and stopped, the car ticking and creaking as it cooled. The 78 balloon bumped my cheek when I turned. "Right," I said. My voice sounded oddly calm. "Fine. I'll turn round." Tom exhaled, relieved. "Thank you. We'll sort it later." "Yeah." I hung up without answering. For a minute or two, I just sat in the lay-by, watching people come and go with Costa cups and screaming children. The envelope on the passenger seat felt like it was burning a hole through the upholstery. Here's the thing nobody tells you about a moment like that: it's not clean. It's not cinematic. It's messy and humiliating, and your first instinct isn't righteous fury. It's shame. I sat there, a 50-something woman in a bobbly cardigan and sensible shoes, feeling like a teenager told she couldn't sit at the cool table. And then, underneath the shame, something else started to move. Something older, tired. No, I said out loud to the empty car. I didn't drive home. I drove to the estate agent. Barbara looked up from her screen when I walked in. Sunday skeleton staff. Half a sandwich on her desk. Oh, Maggie, isn't it everything all right with the completion it completed? I said. And now I need to put it straight back on the market. Cash buyers only. Minimum asking £420. 000. Today, her eyebrows nearly flew off her forehead. You've changed your mind. My circumstances have changed. I said, I'm selling. She asked questions. Of course. People always do when a woman behaves unexpectedly with money. I gave her very little. In under an hour, the paperwork was updated. The photos were dusted off. The listing ready to go live again. Somewhere between initialing a form and signing a sole agency agreement, that shame in my chest cooled into something harder, cleaner. My grandmother had left me that money. Not them. Not Eleanor. Not Tom. Not James. Me. I walked back out to the car with the agency copy of the listing in my hand and sat for a long moment, staring at the smiling photo of a house that no longer meant love. It meant boundaries. I should have gone home then, I suppose. Made a cup of tea, had a little cry, waited for Tom to come back with his reasonable voice and his explanations about Mom's age and how she gets. But a thought had started circling in my head, aggravating as a blue bottle. If she didn't want me at this mysterious family meeting, what were they discussing that I wasn't allowed to hear? I put the car in gear and drove instead to Davidson Construction. You've seen places like it 1,000 times. Small industrial estate on the edge of town. Gray cladding. The company name in fading blue letters. A couple of white vans outside with the logo peeling at the edges. For years, Tom had painted the same picture in words business was up and down. COVID had nearly finished them. Brexit had killed the margins. We were lucky to keep the doors open. That's why I had an allowance and not access. That's why there was never quite enough for holidays or replacing the sofa. I parked where the men usually did, facing the roller shutter, and dug my phone out of my bag. Company's house is a marvelous thing when you're in the mood for unpleasant truths. Took me about 3 minutes to pull up Davidson Construction Southern Limited. Another 2 to download the last 3 years of accounts. The first thing I saw was the turnover. I blinked and refreshed the page. Same numbers. Another tab showed salaries to directors, dividends paid, profit, big profit. Their struggling little family firm had done over $8 million in turnover last year. Director remuneration, well into 6 figures. Healthy reserves. Pension contributions. My heart started pounding, but not from panic this time. It was like someone had reached into my chest and flicked on a light. For a quarter of a century, I'd sat at that kitchen table budgeting my little allowance, listening to Tom and Eleanor sigh about how hard it all was. I'd offered to pick up extra shifts, to downsize, to help out with Mom. I had bought his mother a house out of my inheritance because I thought they were skint. I scrolled and scrolled, reading notes on the accounts I barely understood, but the headlines were clear enough. They were not skint. They hadn't been skint for years. I don't know how long I sat there in that car, staring at my phone while the drizzle turned to proper rain and ran in greasy lines down the windscreen. Long enough for the screen to go to sleep twice. Long enough for that light inside me to stop flickering and steady into something like resolve. That's when Tom rang again. Where are you? He sounded furious this time. Mom's asking. I've told her you went home. I didn't. I cut in. I went to Barbara's. The house is back on the market. I'll keep you posted on the offers. There was a horrible, crackling silence. What I'm selling the house. Tom, my inheritance, my decision. I looked up at the Davidson Construction logo on the building, water streaking over the paint. Seeing as your family meeting doesn't include me, Maggie, don't be ridiculous. We talked about this house for months. Mum's counting on me, I said. She's counting on me. Just like she's counted on me to feel guilty every time you've told me you're barely keeping the business above water, while you've both been paying yourselves six-figure salaries. Another silence. Different quality this time. Sharpened. Where are you? He asked. Very quiet. In your car park. I said, and I've got your company's house filings on my phone. So let's not pretend I've got the wrong business. Shall we? He started to bluster then. Something about you don't understand how accounts work in paper profit versus cash flow. But the spells on those words had broken. I could hear the shape of the lies now, even if I didn't know all the technical bits. You told me we couldn't afford to replace the washing machine, I said, my voice climbing over his. You told me we couldn't afford to help my sister when she nearly lost her flat. You've given me an allowance like a teenager while you and your brother draw more in a month than I see in a year, and you let me believe your mother was one step away from going back to the council for a flat. It's not like that, he snapped. You don't know the pressures, and what happens to us happens to you. Remember that these things are complicated. There it was again, that little threat curled up under his words. What happens to us happens to you. It would come back later, that phrase, in rooms with far sterner faces than mine. But right then, it just made me cold. If you wanted to involve me in complicated, I said, you could have started by letting me sit at the table this morning. Instead of telling me I'm not blood family, that was Mum, he said quickly. She's old-fashioned. You know what she's like. I do now, I said. I know exactly what she's like. I could feel him scrambling, looking for some emotional lever to pull. Usually he'd find one. Guilt, duty, love. I'd given him the map myself over the years in 1,000 tired confessions. Not this time. I'm going home. I said, I'll pack a bag. Then I'm going to have a very thorough look through your filing cabinet. Tom, the locked one in your office, and after that, we're going to have our own family meeting. He inhaled sharply. Maggie, don't start something you can't finish. Oh, I'm only just starting, I said, and ended the call. I sat there a minute longer, watching my reflection faint in the rain-streaked glass. A woman in her late 50s, hair going silver at the temples, lines round her mouth from years of biting back words. Not glamorous, not dramatic, just done. Be honest with me. If you'd found those accounts after that phone call, what would you have done? Would you still have turned up with the potato salad and the balloon and pretended everything was fine? You can tell me. You're safe here. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the Davidson Construction car park, indicator ticking like a metronome to my new life. At home, there was a key hidden in the back of Tom's wardrobe and a locked cabinet full of secrets I'd never been allowed to see. I'd been excluded from their blood family meeting. Now I was going to find out exactly what they'd been meeting about all these years, and trust me, you're going to want to hear what I found in that cabinet. The key was exactly where he'd hidden it, taped to the underside of his oldest jumper on the top shelf. You remember I told you I was going to open that cabinet. This is the bit where it stops being about hurt feelings and starts being about fraud. So if you stayed through the birthday snub, don't go anywhere now. I didn't even take my coat off when I got home. I went straight upstairs, past the framed holiday photos we never could really afford, into our bedroom, Tom's wardrobe still smelled faintly of his aftershave and plaster dust. I dragged a chair over, climbed up, and peeled the tape back with my fingernails. Cold brass dropped into my palm. It struck me, stupidly, that I could have found that key at any time in the last 10 years. I'd been the one who helped him clear out old clothes. I'd dusted up there. I'd changed the bloody light bulbs. But I'd never looked for it, because I trusted him. Not anymore, I murmured, and climbed down. Tom's little home office was at the back of the house, the one with the view of the neighbor's laurel hedge. He'd always liked the idea of it being his space. Somewhere he could concentrate on figures. I'd respected that boundary. Knocked. Waited to be invited in. Left mugs of tea by the door. The filing cabinet sat under the window. Matte gray. 2 drawers. Combination lock originally. Then a key when the dial started sticking. Funny that. The key slid into the lock, turned with a satisfying clunk. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd imagined it. Neat suspension files, labels typed, dates in order. A whole secret history of our lives in manila and plastic. I pulled the top file, tax, personal. Inside were our returns. Years and years of them. His, thick and stapled. Pages of figures and notes. Mine, thin. Pay and a few charity donations. Director remuneration, £136. 000. Dividends, £40. 000. Pension contributions. I felt my cheeks burn as I did the rough sums. I opened another file. Properties. There was our house. The mortgage we were supposedly struggling with. Then, another mortgage. In his and James's names. For a buy-to-let in Portsmouth. Another, in just James's name. But with Tom listed as guarantor. Tenancy agreements. Letting agent statements. Income. And we couldn't replace the washing machine. I said to the empty room. Of course we couldn't. At the back of the folder sat a thin, smug-looking file, Eleanor. I pulled it out. There was the leasehold for her flat, not the cramped council place she always described, but a well-kept, purpose-built block with service charges that made my eyes water. A statement from an investment portfolio in her name. Mid-6 figures. Another from a savings account she could have dipped into at any time. Instead of sighing over the price of gas and letting me pick up her bills, if you really insist, dear. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears would come later. Inconveniently. In a supermarket queue when I saw a woman in a beige coat about her age. Right then I was still. Cold and still. My phone buzzed on the desk, making me jump. Barbara. Hi. Maggie. Sorry to bother you on a Sunday. We've had 3 cash inquiries already and 1 full asking price offer. They want a quick completion. I stared at a random figure on Eleanor's investment statement while she spoke. A little black number that represented half my old salary. Take the highest. I said, cash only. No chain. I'm happy to complete as fast as your solicitors can manage. Are you sure you don't want to? I'm sure. When I hung up, the house felt different, as if I'd picked up one wall and shifted it a few inches. My gift to Eleanor was no longer shiny and sentimental. It was liquidity. My money turned back into my future. I went back to the cabinet. Further down were ISAs, term deposits, accounts I'd never heard of, some in his name, some joint. A couple with my name tacked on like an afterthought, so that if it all went wrong, they could drag me down with them. At the bottom of one folder, tucked in behind some life insurance paperwork, there was a business card. Black, with silver lettering. Asterisk, asterisk, Premier Investigations. Discreet Inquiry Agents. Asterisk, asterisk, a name, a mobile number, an email. On the back, stapled, a flimsy till-style receipt with the date, 6 months earlier. The line item read, Subject Margaret Davidson, Background and Financial Assessment, Paid in Full. For a moment, my vision actually blurred. My own name, printed there in cold ink like I was a potential tenant or a dodgy builder they didn't trust. I sat down hard on the office chair. Of all the things I'd expected to find in that cabinet, someone having done a full workup on me hadn't entered my mind. My grandmother hadn't even died yet when that receipt was printed. He'd been preparing, lining up his information, before I'd even decided what to do with the inheritance. I picked up the card. My thumb hovered over the phone number. "This is mad," I muttered. And then, because there's a point where you either look away or you look properly, I dialed. Premier Investigations answered with a bland, pleasant voice. I gave my name, said I'd found their card, asked as casually as I could manage whether they had done any work relating to me. There was a pause, typing. Then, yes, Mrs. Davidson. We did a report for a Mr. Thomas Davidson last year. Standard background and financial checks. Nothing untoward. Last year, I said, do you have the exact date? He read it out. It matched the receipt. And what sort of information did you collect? My mouth was dry. Credit history, outstanding debts, assets, liabilities, that sort of thing. Bankruptcies, CCJs. We compiled a profile based on publicly available data and some inquiries, all quite routine. Did my husband say why he wanted that done? I knew how ridiculous the question was, even as I asked it. Another tiny pause. He said he wanted to protect the family business before any large sums were mingled. When I ended that call, my hands were shaking so badly I had to put the phone down before I dropped it. Tell me, if you discovered your partner had hired a private investigator to comb through your finances like that, what would you be thinking? Would you be able to shrug it off as just being practical? I know some people will. And honestly, I'd love to hear from you, because my mind went somewhere much darker. He hadn't married me and then got greedy. He'd treated me like a risk assessment. The confrontation that followed was mercifully brief. I rang him, still in the office, the PI card on the blotter in front of me, and told him what I'd found. The tax returns, the rental properties, Eleanor's investments, premier bloody investigations. He did what people like Tom always do. At first he minimized, then justified. It was standard due diligence. He said he was protecting both of us, in case I had hidden debts, in case my family tried to make a claim on money I put into the marriage. It was all for our future. Really. I am your future. I said, you don't run a report on your future. When he started on about how exposing the business to outside scrutiny would hurt everyone, including me, I realized something important. He truly believed the worst thing that could happen here was his little empire being embarrassed. Not me being violated, not my trust being broken. I'm leaving the house tonight, I told him. I'll take some clothes, my laptop, and not much else. I'll text you where I am when I'm ready to talk, and I'll only talk if you stop lying. Maggie. I hung up. I packed like a woman in a fire. Essentials only. Clothes that didn't need ironing. My passport. My grandmother's jewelry. The notebooks where I kept all the things I was too polite to say out loud. I transferred what I could from the joint current account into the little savings account in my own name that he'd always called your fun money, as if I were a teenager saving for a festival. On my way out, I went back into the office one more time. Something in me knew I wasn't coming back to this version of my life. There was another folder I hadn't opened yet, Gov, Support, COVID. Boring title, very boring. If you want people not to look too closely. Inside were loan agreements. Bounce back loan scheme. Coronavirus business interruption loan. Figures in black that made my stomach twist. 250 pounds, 000 here. 150 pounds, 000 there. Emails printed out between Tom, James, and their accountant. Phrases highlighted: business hardship, projected downturn, eligibility criteria, forgivable portion. Wedged in the back was a company's house printout for another entity, Griffin Holdings UK Limited, registered to a P.O. box in Brighton, with a correspondence address in a solicitor's office. Director James Davidson. Person of significant control, Eleanor Davidson. I'd never heard of Griffin Holdings in my life. There were bank statements, too, with thick black lines showing transfers out of the Davidson construction account into Griffin Holdings. Then, a few weeks later, a property completion statement for a 3-bed bungalow near the coast. Purchase price £480. 000. No mortgage needed. The dates overlapped perfectly with the COVID loans. I might not have understood all the technicalities, but I understood enough to feel that cold, falling lift sensation in my gut. While the government was hurling lifelines at struggling businesses, they'd been busy buying themselves a seaside bolt hole through a shell company. And my name was on some of those documents. As director's spouse, as joint account holder, as the idiot who trusted them. That was the point I knew I needed someone on my side who understood all of this in a way I didn't. Not Tom's accountant, not some bloke down the pub. A professional who didn't owe the Davidsons anything. I booked a room at the Millbrook Inn, 10 miles away, under my maiden name, Margaret Thompson. It felt like picking up an old coat I'd left hanging in a stranger's hall. The next morning, I sat in a solicitor's office that smelled of toner and cheap coffee, opposite a woman with sharp eyes and a kind mouth. Her name was Patricia Wells, family and company law, according to the website, recommended in hushed tones by a friend who'd once had to divide a business in a nasty divorce. I put the Premier Investigations card on her desk. The tax returns, the property documents, the COVID loan agreements, the Griffin Holdings printouts. I laid my marriage out in paper. Patricia didn't interrupt much. She let me talk, only stopping me now and then to ask a precise question. Was your name on this account from the start? Did you sign this, knowing what it was? How long have you been given an allowance? When I ran out of words, she leaned back and steepled her fingers. Right, she said. So, Maggie, here's the good news. You are not mad. You are not overreacting. And you are not powerless. I almost burst into tears right there, simply because someone had named what I was feeling. She explained it step by step. Hidden marital assets, undisclosed properties. The PI could be argued as a breach of privacy, especially if he dug where he shouldn't. The allowance, the narratives about poverty, the pressure to shoulder Eleanor's need, all of it part of a pattern. And then there were the COVID loans. If the loans were obtained on false pretenses, she said, tapping the Griffin Holdings paperwork, and the money was used for purposes outside the scheme rules, that's potentially fraud. Serious fraud. HMRC, the National Crime Agency, the Serious Fraud Office, take your pick. We are not there yet, but the risk exists. And my name is on things. I said, could I go down with them? It's possible they could try to drag you in, she said carefully, which is precisely why you need to move from being a kept spouse in the dark to someone with documented concerns and leverage. She suggested a strategy that, frankly, I'd never have come up with on my own. Not a screaming match, not a dramatic flounce, but a negotiation, a post-nuptial agreement that reflected reality, full financial transparency, joint control of assets, penalties for future deception, a formal apology from Eleanor, an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. And if they refuse, I asked. Then we talk to the authorities, she said. But we don't threaten idly? Maggie, if you say that, you must be prepared to do it. I sat there, clutching my bag, trying to imagine myself marching into a police station with a folder under my arm. It felt surreal, but not as surreal as treating this like a bad patch in a normal marriage. Can I ask? She added, softer now. What do you times want out of this? Not just what you're afraid of. It startled me. That question. I'd been so focused on fear and betrayal that wants felt indulgent. I want respect. I said, finally, I want to know where I stand. I want to stop being the one who pays and apologizes. And I don't want to go to prison for something I didn't do. Fairly modest. When you line it up like that, if you were me at that table, what would you times have asked for? Would you have run, demanded half of everything, reported them straight away, or would you, like me, have tried once, just once, to see if they could choose you over the lies? After I left Patricia's, I went to the library, old-fashioned, maybe, but I didn't want to do my searches over our home Wi-Fi where Tom and James might notice. In the quiet hum of computers and the smell of dust and old paper, I pulled up articles on the bounce-back loan scheme, on fraud investigations, on companies named and shamed for misusing funds. It didn't take much digging to find that some loan details were, in fact, public, enough to see that Davidson Construction had taken multiple six-figure loans, declared severe impact from the pandemic, then later filed accounts showing record profits and generous director dividends. All the while, Tom had been telling me we were hanging on by our fingernails. By the time I checked back into the Millbrook Inn that evening, my head felt like it was full of static. There were 3 voicemails waiting on my phone. One from Tom, one from Eleanor, one from James. Tom's was a mixture of pleading and irritation. We can talk about all this. Mags, you've taken it way too far. Mum's in bits. She doesn't understand what she's done wrong. You're blowing up the family over a misunderstanding about a house. Come home. We'll sort it privately. Eleanor's was pure performance. Maggie, dear, I'm sorry if you times felt times hurt earlier. You know, I'm very old-fashioned about family business. I never meant for you to overreact like this. We must present a united front. These things get messy. James's was shorter, flatter. Maggie, it's James. You don't want to bring the business into this. Anything that hurts us hurts you. Think carefully about your next move. What happens to us happens to you. There it was again, that refrain. Once, it had just sounded like a threat about money. Now, with Patricia's words about fraud in my ears, I heard something else, a warning about handcuffs. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, shoes still on, staring at the patterned carpet. Then I picked up my phone and rang Tom. He answered on the first ring. Mags. Tomorrow, I said. Midday. Our kitchen. You, James, and Eleanor. No side meetings. No whispering in corners. You will all sit down with me, and we will talk about the business. The properties, the loans, and the way I've been treated. I have spoken to a solicitor. I know more than you think I do, and I'm giving you one chance to be honest. Maggie, don't threaten. I'm not threatening. I said, I'm offering you terms. Transparency, joint control, an apology. If you refuse, or if you lie to me again, I will take everything I've found to people who won't care that you're blood family. There was a long, brittle silence. I could almost hear the calculations in his head. I'll talk to them, he said eventually. We'll see you tomorrow. No, I said, you'll times all times see me tomorrow. Or the next people who come knocking won't be bringing trifle for Sunday lunch. I ended the call and lay back on the thin hotel pillows, heart hammering, staring at the ceiling stain that looked like a map of somewhere I'd never been. Next stop, that kitchen table. Only this time, I wasn't the one on the outside. And trust me, you're going to want to be there when I walk in with that folder. I walked into my own kitchen carrying a lever. If you've ever had to face a room full of people who think they own you, you'll understand that feeling. Folder in hand, heart going like a drum. Knowing this is the moment everything either shifts or snaps. If part 2 made you angry on my behalf, stay with me now, because this is where I stopped apologizing. They were all there, right on midday, as I demanded. That in itself was unusual. Tom, leaning against the worktop with his arms folded, the good son in his checked shirt. James at the table, sleeves rolled up like it was a board meeting. And Eleanor, of course, at the head of the table as if she'd bought the house herself. The only chair left was the one at the foot, tucked in, slightly turned away. I walked round them all and pulled the chair out from the side, then moved it to the top opposite her. Head of the table number 2, you could feel the temperature drop. Tom tried a smile. You look tired. Love, come on. Sit down. We don't need. I put the folder on the table with a soft thud. We're going to do this like adults. I said, nobody talks over me. Nobody tells me how I felt. And if anyone calls me overly sensitive, I will get up and walk straight from here to my solicitor. James's eyebrows twitched. He clocked that word. Solicitor. Eleanor gave me that tight, wounded look she'd perfected over the years. Maggie, dear, this drama is really quite unnecessary. We're family. We don't go running off to strangers with our problems. You're the ones who ran off to strangers about me, I said, and slid the Premier Investigations card down the table with one finger. It stopped in front of Tom. He stared at it. The color rose in his neck. I found your receipt, I said, for the background and financial assessment, ordered 6 months before my grandmother's will was even finalized. You had someone go through my entire financial life without telling me. That's not protecting the family. That's treating your wife like a risk. Oh, don't be ridiculous, Eleanor sniffed. It's just due diligence. You can't be too careful these days. What with gold diggers? I laughed then. A sharp little sound that startled even me. Gold diggers don't buy houses for their mother-in-law. For a second, nobody spoke. James reached for the card, turned it over. Read the tiny printing. When he looked up, his face was careful. That's not ideal, he said to Tom. You should have told her. Tom bristled. I was going to. It's just. I opened the folder and laid out copies of the tax returns, the property portfolios, the statements showing Eleanor's investments and savings. Each sheet another little bomb on the pine. For 25 years, I said, you've sat in this kitchen and told me how hard up you are, how the business is on its knees, how Eleanor is struggling to stay afloat. You've let me feel guilty every time I spent a tenner, while you drew 6-figure salaries, bought rental properties, and made sure Mum here is sitting on more assets than I'll ever see. I pushed the pages towards Eleanor. You aren't poor. You were never poor. You lied to me. Her lips thin. She shuffled the papers as if they might bite. Those are private, she said. You had no right to go snooping through Thomas's. I had every right. My hands were steady now. Oddly enough, this is my life, my marriage, my legal liability. And speaking of liability, I pulled out the COVID loan paperwork, the bounce-back loan agreements, the transfers to Griffin Holdings, the seaside bungalow completion statement. James's hand actually flinched when he saw the Griffin name. I caught it. Ah, I said softly. Now we're getting warmer. Tom tried to grab the papers. but I held on to them. It turned into a brief, undignified tug of war over the kitchen table, the sort of thing that would be funny if the stakes were lower. Let go, Tom, I said, or I'll call the police before we've even started. He let go. Right, I went on. Here's how I understand it, and do jump in if I've got anything wrong. During COVID, Davidson Construction applied for multiple bounce back and other support loans, claiming severe hardship. The loans were supposed to be used to keep the business afloat. Instead, large chunks of that money were transferred into Griffin Holdings, which you set up with James and Eleanor. I nodded at them each in turn. Griffin then magically produced the cash to buy a coastal bungalow outright. No mortgage. Must be nice. Tom's mouth opened and closed. It's tax efficient, he managed. You don't understand how these things work. Mags. Everyone moved money around during COVID. The schemes were designed to help businesses that would have gone under. I cut in. Not to fund your seaside retirement plan. Eleanor bristled. We were safeguarding the family's future. Those loans were offered. Everybody took them. Not everybody lied about hardship while paying themselves record dividends, I said, feeling my temper finally light. And not everybody used them to buy themselves a second home through a shell company. James cleared his throat. Careful. Maggie, you're throwing big words around. Lied. Shell company. You don't want to make statements like that without understanding the implications. Oh, I understand the implications. I said. Patricia explained them beautifully. That got their attention. 3 heads snapped up. Who's Patricia? Tom asked slowly. My solicitor, I said. She specializes in family and company law. She's seen all of this. She's aware my name is on some of the accounts, and that I signed things I didn't fully understand because I was told we were struggling. She has advised me on what to say next. I looked at each of them in turn. So here it is. I'm going to give you my terms. One time, and then I'm going to walk away and let you decide whether you want to accept them, or whether you want to take your chances explaining Griffin Holdings to HMRC, the National Crime Agency, or whoever else takes an interest in your little creativity. You should have seen their faces. If you've ever dropped a truth like that in a room where you were meant to stay quiet, you'll know that mix of satisfaction and terror. Would you have been able to say it, or would you have softened it, made it into a suggestion, instead of a line in the sand? Tom found his voice first. You're blackmailing us, he said, faintly. No, I said. Blackmail would be asking for handbags and spa days to keep quiet. This is me negotiating the terms of my continued involvement in this family. Because right now, I am tethered to you financially and legally, and you have lied to me and potentially involved me in fraud. I am entitled to protect myself. James, surprisingly, sat back and nodded once, like he respected the logic even as he hated it. All right, he said, let's hear the terms. So I laid them out. First, I said, total financial transparency. I am to be added as joint owner on all marital properties and properly informed of all business interests that affect our household. No more locked cabinets. No more you wouldn't understand. Second, joint control. Full co-signature rights on major decisions. I want at least a formal minority stake in Davidson Construction, the shares to reflect 25 years of unpaid labor as wife, hostess, unpaid PA and emotional punch bag. That stake is to be legally recorded and protected. Tom spluttered at that, but I held up a hand. Third, a comprehensive postnuptial agreement. It will state, in black and white, that any further concealment of assets, any further surveillance of me, or any further fraud that drags my name in, will result in an unequal division of assets in my favor if we divorce. No argument. No, but the business. You want me to stay. You accept that consequence. Eleanor made a strangled noise. That's outrageous. You would bankrupt my sons. They've managed fine without telling me anything, I said. If they want me to stay, they can manage fine while doing the bare minimum of honesty. I took a breath. This was the last bit, the one my younger self would never have dared say. And fourth, an apology. In writing, from you, Eleanor, acknowledging that you have repeatedly exaggerated your financial difficulties, used guilt to pressure me into paying for things I thought you couldn't afford, and treated me as less than family. That letter will be kept with the postnup. Not to wave around, not to humiliate you, but so I have something to look at when you start rewriting history. You could have heard a pin drop. Eleanor's cheeks were blotchy. I will not be bullied into confessing to. You already confessed, I said quietly. Every time you told me I was your only support, every time you let me pick up the bill while you sat on your investments. The difference now is that I have proof. Tom pushed his hand through his hair. If you go to a solicitor and start waving fraud around, he said, they'll go to the authorities. What happens to us happens to you, Mags. I've told you that. Yes, I said, and Patricia was very clear about that, which is why I'm giving you this one chance to bring me in properly. To put me on paper as an equal partner, not a patsy. Because if this ever does go to the authorities, I need a clear record that I raised concerns and tried to fix it from the inside. That I wasn't just nodding along. James was staring at the Griffin paperwork now, jaw tight. And if we say no, he asked. I closed the folder. Then tomorrow morning, Patricia sends everything to the appropriate bodies. HMRC, the NCA, maybe even the Serious Fraud Office. If she thinks it fits, I'll cooperate fully. I'll protect myself. And you can explain Griffin Holdings to someone with a warrant. I stood up. My knees shook, but I stood. I'm going back to the hotel, I said. You have until noon tomorrow to decide. If I don't have a clear yes from all three of you by then, we do this the hard way. Tom got up too, reaching across the table. Maggie, be reasonable. We can't make decisions like this overnight. There are shareholders, staff. You're putting everything at risk. You put everything at risk when you lied. I said, I'm just choosing whether I go down with you. I walked out, folder under my arm, leaving them in a huddle of whispers and hissing. As I shut the front door, I heard Eleanor say, in this strange, shaken voice, she sounds just like her grandmother. It wasn't meant as a compliment. I took it as one. Back at the Millbrook, I sat on the bed with my shoes still on, staring at my phone like it might bite. Noon tomorrow. Could you have slept? Could you have trusted them to do the right thing even once? I'm curious, because I barely slept at all. At 1114 the next morning, Tom rang. We'll sign, he said, without preamble. He sounded as if someone had taken a sandpaper block to his vocal cords. All of it. The postnup, the shares, the deeds. Mum's letter. Our solicitor will talk to your Patricia, but we want to keep this out of court, out of the papers. For everyone's sake, for mine most of all, I said, and you understand that if Patricia finds anything else you've hidden, the deal changes. A pause. We understand, he said. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork. If you've never drafted a postnup in the UK, count yourself fortunate. It's about as fun as it sounds. Patricia was magnificent. She pored over every line of their disclosures, insisted on independent valuations, built in clauses that meant if any more undeclared assets appeared, a pre-agreed slice would automatically become mine. She made sure I had indemnity against any past wrongdoing I hadn't knowingly signed up for. The day we all gathered to sign, the atmosphere was oddly corporate. Patricia at one end of the conference table, their solicitor at the other, the Davidsons and me in the middle. A jug of water. Too many pens. Tom's hand shook as he signed the transfer of equity on our house. Mine didn't when I countersigned. James slid across the share certificates, his expression unreadable. "Welcome to the board," he said, dry as dust. Eleanor's apology letter was the hardest. Patricia had helped draft it. Eleanor had rephrased parts, tried to soften others. In the end, it read like a cross between a confession and a press release. But the key sentences were there. She had misrepresented her finances to me. She had allowed me to believe she was dependent when she was not. She recognized this had been manipulative and caused harm. She signed it with a firm hand. Eleanor Davidson, matriarch, co-conspirator, reluctant, penitent. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my bag. 6 months later, you'd have thought, from the outside, that we were the picture of a slightly stuffy but successful family firm. Davidson Construction was booming. New contracts, smart branding, a shiny website with stock photos of men in hard hats and women in high-vis smiling over plans. I had an office now, a real one, not the corner of the dining table. Name on the door, M. Davidson, director. I went in 3 days a week in a smart blazer, sat in on meetings, asked questions. Staff got used to seeing me, not just as Tom's wife bringing biscuits, but as someone who signed things, queried budgets, suggested changes. I pushed for better HR policies, for proper health and safety, for a bit more generosity with staff bonuses. I suggested we quietly pay back some of the COVID support faster than required, just to be safe. Tom grumbled but did it. It all looked respectable. Our marriage even looked better. On the surface. New washing machine. Finally, a week in Devon without me having to ask whether we could afford petrol. Tom was attentive in that slightly desperate way of a man who knows he's on his last chance. I didn't kid myself that he'd changed fundamentally. But the power balance had shifted. That mattered. And yet, every so often I'd walk past James's office and hear the low murmur of voices, the word Griffin slipping out and stopping when I appeared. I'd see emails flagged strictly confidential bouncing between him and the accountant. I'd watch Eleanor at Sunday lunch, flicking through the financial pages with a little furrow between her brows. You know that feeling when you sense a storm building far off? Long before the clouds reach you. That one Tuesday afternoon, about 6 months after the postnup, I was in my office going through quarterly figures, staff costs, materials, director's drawings. Everything scrubbed a bit cleaner since I'd started asking awkward questions. My mobile rang. Unknown number. London code. Hello. Maggie speaking. Mrs. Margaret Davidson. The voice was male. Polite. With that clipped, official edge you hear from people who spend a lot of time reading cautions. This is she, I said slowly. Good afternoon, Mrs. Davidson. My name is Detective Sergeant Alan Price, City of London Police, Financial Crime Unit. A tiny pause. I wonder if you've got a moment to talk about some COVID support loans taken out by Davidson Construction during the pandemic. My mouth went dry. Right. I said, yes, I'm one of the directors now. Yes, we're aware, he said. Papers rustled on his end. Your name appears in several places. It would be useful to get your perspective. We're conducting an enquiry into potential irregularities in how certain loans were applied for and used. At this stage, it's just a conversation. Just a conversation. I looked down at the spreadsheet open on my screen, numbers suddenly swimming. What sort of irregularities I managed? I'd rather go through the details in person. He said, we can come to you, or you can attend an interview at our offices. You're not under arrest. Mrs. Davidson, but I would advise you to bring a solicitor. There it was. The line I'd been walking for months suddenly lit up in police tape. I see, I said. Would tomorrow morning be convenient, he asked, My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Tomorrow, the kitchen table wouldn't be my battlefield. It would be theirs. I'll have to check with my solicitor. I said, but yes, I think we need to talk. I hung up and stared at my phone for a full minute, the world narrowing to a little rectangle of glass and the reflection of my own pale face. Tom had always said, what happens to us happens to you. Up until that moment, I don't think he'd really understood that it worked both ways. I picked up my bag, grabbed my car keys with hands that weren't entirely steady, and did the only sensible thing left. I went to find Patricia, and you'll want to hear what she told me I had to do next. You are not going into that interview alone. That was the first thing Patricia said when I told her about the call from the financial crime unit. If you remember the end of part 3, I just put the phone down on a detective who wanted a quick chat about the COVID loans. This is where that polite little phrase turns into handcuffs. We met in her office that same afternoon. She listened, fingers steepled, while I repeated what Detective Sergeant Price had said. When I mentioned my name on several documents, her mouth tightened. All right, she said, here's the good news and the bad. Which do you want first? Bad. I said, might as well. The bad news is that this is serious. She said, they don't get the City of London Financial Crime Unit involved for a bit of casual tax dodging. We're talking potential fraud charges, conspiracy, money laundering depending how creative they've been. And the good, I asked. The good, she said, is that you came to me months ago. You documented your concerns. You insisted on transparency. You are on record as the spouse who was lied to, not the co-architect. That gives us room to negotiate. Negotiate. Funny how that word kept cropping up in my life now. If you were in my shoes at that point, would you be thinking, asterisk, I want them all in prison times? Or would you, like me, be thinking, asterisk, I just don't want to go down for their greed times? Be honest with yourself. Patricia insisted we treat the interview like a formal step in a process, not a friendly chat. She rang D.S. Price herself, introduced herself as my solicitor, and arranged for us to attend his office in the city the next morning. She also said something that chilled me. They will likely have more evidence than you do, she said. You can't go in there assuming you're telling them news. You're filling in gaps. And if they offer you any kind of protection or immunity, we take it. Immunity, I repeated. What am I? A gangster. You're a woman whose name appears on documents linked to possible fraud, she said gently. That's enough. The next morning, we went up on the train like two ordinary commuters, me clutching my handbag like a shield. The financial crime unit's building was modern and bland, all glass and security passes. Inside, it smelled of photocopiers and cheap coffee and fear. D.S. Price met us in reception with a younger officer he introduced as D.C. Rose. Both were in shirt sleeves, ties slightly askew, the way people look when they've been glued to their desks for months chasing numbers. We sat in a small interview room, neutrally beige. They made a point of saying, "You are not under arrest, Mrs. Davidson. You are here voluntarily, and you can leave at any time." A recording device sat on the table, little red light winking. Then Price opened a file, and my blood went cold. They had everything. The bounce-back loan applications, the C-bills paperwork, copies of bank statements showing money in, money out, transfers to Griffin Holdings, the coastal bungalow purchase, even internal emails between Tom and the accountant. Where did you get those? I asked. Stupidly, various sources. He said, bank disclosures, the British Business Bank, anonymous reports. He glanced up at me. I'm sure you understand I can't say more than that. Anonymous reports. Someone had already blown the whistle before I'd even found the filing cabinet key. At the time, I assumed journalist, disgruntled employee, rival firm. Later, I'd find out it was much closer to home. Price slid one document towards me. A COVID support loan application form. There, in scanned handwriting, was Tom's usual scrawl. And there, typed, was a box marked spouse, partner. My name. You were aware these loans were being taken out, he asked. I was aware, vaguely. I said, Tom told me we had to apply to survive, that everyone was doing it. I didn't see this form at the time. You didn't sign anything, DC Rose cut in. I signed some bank documents he put in front of me. I said, transfer mandates. Maybe. He told me if I didn't, staff couldn't be paid. It was the middle of the pandemic. People were dying. You sign, don't you? I felt defensive saying it, like a child making excuses, but it was the truth. They asked careful questions. What had Tom told me about the loans? Did I know about Griffin Holdings? Had I ever visited the coastal bungalow? What did I know about how the money was used? Patricia interjected when they strayed towards opinion. She's here as a witness, not a forensic accountant, she said more than once. Stick to what she actually knew and when she knew it. At one point, Price leaned back, folded his hands over his stomach, and looked at me in a way that felt measuring. Mrs. Davidson, he said, you came to your solicitor about concerns over this business months ago. You've been effectively forcing your husband and his family to be more transparent since. That's unusual in our line of work. Often, we see spouses who just enjoy the lifestyle and ask no questions. I enjoyed a broken washing machine and a monthly allowance. I said, if that's a lifestyle, it's not a very glamorous one. He cracked the ghost of a smile at that. We're going to be frank with you, he went on. From what we've seen so far, there is enough to charge your husband, his brother, and his mother with multiple offenses: fraud by false representation, false accounting, possibly conspiracy to defraud. Your name is on some of the paperwork, which technically makes you a potential suspect. The room swam for a second. I gripped the edge of the table. However, he continued, from your actions and from some other evidence we have, it appears you were misled and used. If you are willing to cooperate fully with this investigation, to provide us with documents in your possession and, potentially, to assist us in gathering further evidence, we will seek an undertaking from the Crown Prosecution Service that you will not be prosecuted. There it was. The deal. I glanced at Patricia. She gave the smallest of nods. You should take that very seriously, she murmured. It's as close as you get here to the word immunity. Price must have read something in my face. We're not asking you to entrap your family, he said. We're asking you to help us prove what they're already doing. You're in a unique position. And frankly, Mrs. Davidson, if you don't help us, we can't promise the CPS won't see you as part of the conspiracy. If you were me, sitting in that beige room with those papers on the table, what would loyalty look like to you at that point? Keeping quiet and hoping for the best, or making sure you didn't end up sharing a cell for the sake of people who'd happily let you hang? It's easy to judge from the outside. It's different when your own name is on the charge sheet. I'll cooperate, I said. My voice sounded older. On one condition, Price raised an eyebrow, which is that you don't try to dress this up as me betraying some great loving family. I said, they investigated me when they thought there might be money to be had. They lied about everything from the price of a tumble dryer to government loans. They made me feel like I was going mad. I am protecting myself. He held my gaze. Understood, he said. We're not in the business of romanticizing fraudsters. The undertaking from the CPS wasn't a single magic word. It was a stack of legalese that Patricia went through line by line. In essence, I agreed to full, honest cooperation, including giving evidence in court if required. In return, They agreed not to prosecute me for anything arising from the Davidson construction investigation, provided I wasn't lying or hiding anything. I signed. There was a moment, pen hovering, where I thought times, this is the line. Before this, I could pretend we'd muddle through. After this, I am actively helping to destroy their world, asterisk. And then I thought of Eleanor's blood family only, and Tom's PI receipt, and Griffin Holdings, and I signed anyway. That's when they brought out the pen. It looked like a normal ballpoint, a bit bulkier than usual. Matte black, clip slightly heavier. It records audio. DC Rose said, push the clip down until it clicks. That's on. Click again. That's off. Battery will last a good few hours. We're not asking you to provoke them, Mrs. Davidson. Just don't stop them talking. Breakfast is often when they're at their most complacent. Price added dryly. People say remarkable things over toast. I took the pen, feeling faintly absurd. If you've ever watched those crime dramas where the undercover person slips a wire on and then goes into the lion's den, know this in real life. The lion is usually someone you've made tea for 1,000 times. Walking back into the house that night was like stepping onto a stage. Tom was in the lounge watching something loud and stupid. Socks on the coffee table. He glanced up, wary, as I came in. Everything all right? He asked. That call yesterday. It was nothing immediate. I said, hanging up my coat. They're looking at a lot of companies. I said I'd cooperate where I can. Patricia was there. He relaxed a fraction at the mention of her. In his mind, solicitors existed to smooth things over, not sharpen them. Over the next few weeks, I became a recorder disguised as a wife. Breakfasts with the pen on the table between the marmalade and the coffee. Its little clip depressed. Tom and James discussing presentation of figures for upcoming reviews. Eleanor muttering about not panicking over a few forms and everyone taking advantage of what was on offer. Sunday lunches where Griffin Holdings was mentioned more than once. We can always park that in Griffin. James would say, keeps it off the main books. I'd nod, seemingly vague, while inside I was counting the number of times the words COVID loan and dividends appeared in the same breath. One night Tom came home flushed with success, waving a spreadsheet. See, he said, dropping into the chair opposite me, the pen between us on the table. I told you I knew what I was doing. We showed a dip in 20, big recovery in 21. Nice narrative. No one's going to question that. The loans were there for the taking. Mags. We just played it smart. Smart, I said, keeping my tone light. Is that what you call it? He smirked. Look, the government were chucking money at anyone who could spell business. Half of them didn't even have staff. We legitimately employ people. We took what we were owed, put some into property so it wasn't just sitting there. It's not like we bought Ferraris. The bungalow isn't exactly a council flat, I said. He shrugged. It's an investment. And anyway, Griffin's in Mum's name. Once she pops her clogs, we'll move things around. No one's going to track which pot funded what. They haven't got the manpower. I wish you could have heard the confidence in his voice, the utter belief that he was cleverer than the system. If you've ever sat across from someone like that, did you feel as tired as I did? Leave me a comment if you've had your own Ferraris and bungalows conversation. I'm willing to bet there are more of us than we think. I took that pen to Patricia once a week. We'd sit in her office, plug it into her computer, and listen with headphones while she scribbled timings and notes for the investigators. Each time I left, I felt a little more detached, like I was already living in a different life, watching my old one on a screen. Eventually, Price called and said, "We're nearly there." He and Rose came to Patricia's office with a thicker file and a different energy. Sharper, more purposeful. They had the loan documents, the bank statements. my recording transcripts. And, this was new, several internal emails that clearly referenced using COVID funds for Griffin and maximizing forgiveness while moving assets offshore if needed. We've spoken to the accountant under caution, Price said. He's very keen not to go down for this on his own. He's corroborated a lot of what we've heard. Between that and your recordings, the CPS are satisfied. We'll be making arrests within the next fortnight. Arrests, I repeated. The words sat in my mouth like gravel. We'll need you there, he went on. Ideally, when they're together, it's cleaner that way. Less chance of anyone destroying evidence or concocting a story. You want to arrest them in my house, I said. It's your house jointly now, Patricia said quietly. And yes, it's better than at the office in front of staff. You can control who sees what that way. Price looked almost apologetic. We can do it without you witnessing the actual cuffs, if you prefer. But at some point, Mrs. Davidson, they are going to know you cooperated. There isn't a version of this where you stay the dutiful, oblivious wife. The idea of watching my husband, my brother-in-law, and my mother-in-law being read their rights in my kitchen made my stomach twist. But the idea of it happening somewhere else, messy and uncontrolled, felt worse. All right, I said, we'll do it at breakfast. In the end, it happened at dinner. We'd arranged for Tom, James, and Eleanor to come round on a Thursday evening to talk about some staff changes and where we see the business in 5 years. I cooked something deliberately boring: lasagna, salad, garlic bread. It felt obscene to be chopping onions when I knew what was coming. The pen sat in my apron pocket, switched on more out of habit than necessity now. The real show was about to be live. We ate at the kitchen table. Tom talked too loudly about a big contract he thought we'd win. James corrected him on the margins. Eleanor criticized the salad dressing. It was, in other words, any other dinner. About halfway through, when plates were messy and everyone had relaxed that tiny notch you do after the first glass of wine, I put my fork down. There's something I need to tell you, I said. Tom paused, fork halfway to his mouth. What's that? I looked at each of them, one by one. I've been cooperating with the Financial Crime Unit, I said. For months, they have the loan documents, the bank statements, the Griffin paperwork, the recordings. They know how you used the COVID money. They know about the bungalow. And they've given me an undertaking that I won't be prosecuted as long as I tell the truth. For a second, no one moved. Then, 3 very different reactions. Tom went white, then mottled red. You? What he croaked. James's eyes closed briefly, as if something inevitable had finally arrived. Eleanor's hand flew to her throat. You ungrateful little... Don't, I said sharply. Don't you dare. You excluded me from your blood family meeting. You lied to me for years. You used my name like a shield. I am not going to prison for you. Tom slammed his hand on the table. Cutlery jumping. Spousal privilege. He said wildly. You can't testify against me. You're my wife. That's not how it works here, and certainly not in fraud cases. I said. Patricia's explained it, and even if it were, they don't need my testimony. Tom, they've got the paperwork, the accountant, the bank, my recordings. All I did was make sure they understood I wasn't in on the joke. He pushed back his chair so hard it scraped. You've destroyed us, he said. You've destroyed this family, this business, everything we've built. You destroyed it the first time you lied on a loan form, I said quietly. This is just the bill coming due. Right on cue, there was a knock at the front door. Firm, authoritative. Tom froze. Who's that? You know who it is, I said. James swallowed. Maggie, please. I stood up. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I walked to the hall, opened the door. Price and Rose stood there with two uniformed officers behind them. They looked exactly as they had in the interview room. Only this time they had warrant cards out. "Evening, Mrs. Davidson," Price said. "Is everyone here?" "Yes," I said. "Kitchen." They filed past me, the uniforms hanging back a fraction. I followed, heart hammering, for a surreal moment. I saw my own kitchen as if I were floating near the ceiling, the cheap clock, the stained oven mitt, the live, laugh, love sign my sister had bought me as a joke. And at the center, the Davidsons. Caught like animals in headlights. Thomas Davidson Price said, "James Davidson, Mrs. Eleanor Davidson, I'm Detective Sergeant Price of the City of London Police. I'm arresting you on suspicion of fraud by false representation, contrary to the Fraud Act 2006 and related offenses. You do not have to say anything." He went through the caution. That familiar TV litany suddenly very real. Tom started to protest, then thought better of it when one of the uniforms moved closer with cuffs. Eleanor began to cry, not the dainty sniffles she used for sympathy, but loud, panicked, sobbing. James just stared at the table, jaw clenched. I stood against the wall, hands folded so they wouldn't shake. When Tom looked at me over his shoulder as they led him out, there was a kind of wild disbelief in his eyes. "You did this," he said. "Yes," I said, "I did." "After you did all of it?" They shepherded them down the hall, out of the front door, into the waiting cars. Neighbors' curtains twitched. We'd become a spectacle at last. When the last car pulled away, the house felt impossibly quiet. The Lazan sat congealing on the table, 3 empty chairs. One woman standing in the wreckage of the life she'd been told to be grateful for. I picked up the recording pen from my pocket, clicked it off, and set it on the table between the dirty plates. "Right," I said into the silence. "Now what?" And that, my love, is exactly where part 5 begins. I stood in my own kitchen, alone with a cold lasagne and a silent recording pen, and said, "Right. Now what?" That's where I left you at the end of part 4. The cars pulling away, the neighbors peering out from behind their curtains, and me in the wreckage of a life that didn't exist anymore. If you've ever had that moment where the drama stops and the admin begins, you'll know what came next was less fireworks and more forms. The answer to now what turned out to be interviews, statements, boxes of paper. City of London police emptied the filing cabinet I'd once been afraid to open. They took computers, hard drives, phones. I spent hours in Patricia's office going through my own timeline when I'd first suspected, when I'd confronted, when I'd gone to her. Everything had to be written down calmly, as if I hadn't been living it with my heart in my throat. In the first few weeks, I felt oddly hollow. People imagine you feel triumphant when abusers are pulled out of your house in handcuffs. You don't. You feel like you've detonated your own life. The charges came thick and fast: fraud by false representation, false accounting, conspiracy to defraud, money laundering. Davidson Construction and Griffin Holdings were named in court documents that sounded like something from a headline, not from my kitchen. The Serious Fraud Office joined in at one point. The scale was big enough. There were headlines. Eventually, despite all their efforts to keep things quiet. Asterisk, family construction firm in COVID, loan fraud probe asterisk, that sort of thing. Eleanor's precious reputation didn't survive the first week. 18 months after the arrests, I sat in the public gallery at Crown Court, hands folded in my lap, listening to a judge weigh out years like bags of sugar. 12 for Tom, 15 for James. He'd been more involved with Griffin's structure. 6 for Eleanor. The court taking into account her age and health, but not enough to let her walk away. Confiscation orders followed. Large numbers tossed around, like monopoly money, all sourced from the proceeds of crime. They called me as a witness. I went into that box, took the oath, and told the truth, calmly, clearly. I'd rehearsed with Patricia. The defense barrister tried to needle me, implied I was bitter, vengeful, out for money. I kept my voice steady and said I was out to keep myself out of prison and stop any more theft. If there's money involved, it's because they stole it first. If you've ever had to look someone you loved in the eye while you testify to what they've done, you'll know it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like surgery. After sentencing, the practical fallout hit. The houses, the business, the bungalow by the sea, all examined, sliced up, reallocated. Because I'd gone to Patricia early and had that postnup and that CPS undertaking, I ended up with more than I'd expected and less than they'd promised themselves. Our home became mine outright. Part of the settlement and confiscation agreement involved Griffin Holdings being wound up and the coastal bungalow sold. The clean portion of equity diverted to repay the loans. The remainder, small by their standards and enormous by mine, came to me as part of my share. Poetic. Really. The very bricks and mortar they'd bought with stolen funds became a piece of my safety net. Tom wrote from prison a lot. The first letter arrived 2 weeks after sentencing, on that thin blue paper with the fold lines. He said he was confused, hurt, betrayed. He talked about our marriage as if it had been a joint project I'd abandoned for a better offer. He didn't mention fraud. He barely mentioned staff who'd lost jobs or taxpayers who'd footed the bill. It was all us, as if he hadn't spent years ensuring there was no us in the accounts. I read the first letter. Then I put it back in the envelope, wrote return to sender neatly on the front, and posted it back. Every letter after that, I didn't even open. You might think that's cruel. I get comments sometimes. He was your husband. Surely you owed him closure. Let me ask you this. If someone burns your house down and then sends you pages and pages about how sad they feel about the smoke, do you owe them the smell of it as well? I changed my name back, Margaret Thompson, on my passport and bank accounts. It was like slipping back into my own skin. With Patricia's guidance and a very clever insolvency practitioner, I helped wind down what was left of Davidson Construction and salvage what could be saved for staff and creditors. Then I did something that still makes me smile. I rang Mike Sullivan. Mike was a contractor who'd done work for Davidson Construction years ago. He'd left on bad terms, mutterings about ethics and creative accounting. Tom had always spoken of him with this particular scorn reserved for people who walked away on principle. I met Mike in a cafe near the station. He was broader round the middle than I remembered, hair more salt than pepper, but his eyes were the same steady, kind, amused. Well, he said, when I'd finished the short version, you don't do things by halves, do you, Maggie? I've had 25 years of halves. I said, thought I'd try something different. We set up a small development company together, Thompson and Sullivan Developments. Boring name. Clear purpose. We bought tired houses, refurbished them properly, paid our trades decently, did not fiddle anything. We specialized in projects that actually improved people's lives, converting old buildings into decent flats, creating accessible rooms, that sort of thing. Money-wise, I was fine. Not obscene, not forever, summer holiday rich, but secure. Emotionally, that took longer. If you're going through something like this yourself, I want you to hear this bit clearly. The courtroom doesn't give you peace. It just stops one kind of damage so you can begin cleaning up the rest. 2 years after the sentencing, I was in my office working on plans for a small assisted living block, 12 self-contained flats with proper communal spaces. Not those grim corridors you see on the news when reception buzzed. There's a man here asking for you, my assistant said, says his name's James Davidson. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misheard. You're sure, I said. James. Yes. He says it's important. I've told him you may not have time. Against my better judgment, I told her to send him up. He looked older. Prison does that, even to men who think they're too clever to be caught. Thinner, too. And the swagger was gone. He stood in the doorway of my little office, holding his hands awkwardly as if he didn't know what to do with them. I'm not meant to be here, he said, by way of greeting. License conditions. I'm supposed to stay away from victims. He grimaced around the word. Then why are you, I asked. 'Cause keeping my license clean isn't the only thing I care about, he said. Can I sit? I let him, partly because I was curious, partly because I wanted to hear whatever he'd crossed that line to say. He didn't waste time. I reported us, he said. Before you did. That's what I came to tell you. I blinked. Sorry. The anonymous tip, he went on. The one that kicked off the serious side of the investigation, that was me. I'd been struggling with it for a while. The loans. Griffin. Mum's sense of entitlement. Once I saw you digging. Saw you in the office asking questions. I realized I had a choice. I could let you be dragged under. Or I could make sure someone was looking by the time it all blew up. He told me about late nights in his car outside the house, laptop open, drafting and redrafting a report on that anonymous hotline, about covertly recording conversations with Tom and Eleanor long before I ever wore a recording pin, about meeting a plainclothes officer in a supermarket car park to hand over a USB stick. I didn't do it to save you entirely, he said, honest in that grim way. Some men only manage once they've lost everything. I did it because I couldn't live with it. But when they talked about you in the meetings, about using your name, I pictured you sitting at that kitchen table with your bloody potato salad, and I couldn't leave it. He swallowed. His eyes were bright. I know it doesn't undo anything. I know I'm exactly where I deserve to be. I just didn't want you to go on thinking you were the only one who saw it was wrong. I didn't cry. I expected to. Instead, I felt this strange, heavy sort of relief. You know that feeling when a picture suddenly clicks into sharper focus, that, why tell me now, I asked. Because they're reviewing my license, he said, and because I heard you were building places like this, he glanced at the plans on my desk. Thought you should know not everyone in that family was content to let you take the fall. After he left, I sat for a long time staring at the door. Then I rang D.S. Price. I'm not asking for confidential information, I said, but can you tell me whether my brother-in-law cooperated? Before I came to you, Price was quiet for a moment. We had an anonymous industry tip some months before you arrived, he said finally, with recordings that corroborated a lot of what we later found. I can't name sources, you understand. But if he's told you it was him, he's not lying. I ended up writing to James at the approved address on his license paperwork. I kept it simple. I thanked him for speaking up when he did. I acknowledged the harm. I told him I hoped he'd build something honest when he could. I enclosed a small check. Not a rescue. Not a reward. But a gesture. A line in the sand saying, I can recognize your attempt at redemption without pretending everything's fine. 5 years after the arrests, Thompson and Sullivan built something that became the heart of my new life, the Thompson Senior Living Center. 100 units, bright corridors, actual sunlight in the lounges, staff who were paid properly and treated better. We built it on a patch of derelict land the council had been trying to offload for years. We named it after my maiden name deliberately. Not Davidson, Thompson. A place not defined by blood ties, but by how people treated each other. On the opening day, I walked through the automatic doors and smelled fresh paint, new carpets, and the faint hint of stew from the kitchen. Residents pottered about. Staff laughed. Someone had stuck googly eyes on a plant pot. It felt right. About a year after we opened, reception rang my office again. "There's an elderly lady asking for you," the manager said. Says her name's Eleanor Davidson. She looks quite frail. "Do you want me to tell her you're busy?" For a long moment, I said nothing. "Then bring her to the family room. I'll meet her there." She was tiny when she came in. I don't know whether it was prison, illness, or both. But the formidable woman who'd sat at my kitchen table like a queen had shrunk into someone you'd move for on a bus without thinking. She had a stick, a thin coat, and that smell hospitals can't quite mask. "Maggie," she said, voice rough. "You look, well, I am," I said. "You..." She gave a small, wry smile. "Dying," she said. "Pancreatic. They've given me months. Less, if I'm unlucky." I was in a hospice nearby, and I thought, "I'd like to see what you built. Before I go." We sat. The family room had soft chairs, a big window, a tea tray someone had thoughtfully left. "I came to say I'm sorry," she said. No preamble. Not the half-hearted sort of sorry I wrote in that letter your clever lady made me sign. Properly sorry. We used you. We mocked you. We shut you out of that damned family whenever it suited us, and pulled you back in when we needed something. I told myself you were lucky to be one of us. In reality, we were lucky you stayed as long as you did." She reached into her bag with a shaking hand and pulled out a bundle of envelopes, bound with an elastic band. My name was on them in Tom's handwriting. Dozens of them. "These came to me after he realized you weren't opening them," she said. "Sent to the prison, redirected to me. He wanted me to explain you to him, as if I'd kept some secret manual on how to manage you." Her mouth twisted. "I read them. Every one. He still doesn't understand. He talks about betrayal, about loyalty, about how losing the business hurt him. He barely mentions what we actually did." She pushed the bundle across the table. "I thought you should see, not to hurt you, so you know you're not missing anything. I didn't open them. I didn't need to." The fact she'd read them and come here said more than the contents. We talked a little longer. About my grandmother, about my new work, about what it was like sharing a dormitory at her age. She didn't ask for forgiveness and I didn't grant it. What we exchanged was smaller and, in some ways, more honest, an acknowledgement of reality. Before she left, she handed me an envelope with a solicitor sticker on it. "I've left a little something in my will," she said. "Can't take it with me." And I couldn't quite stomach leaving it all to Tom. "Use it for whatever this is." She gestured vaguely around at the center. "Something that isn't about greed." After her death a few months later, I opened it properly. The amount wasn't huge by Davidson standards. It was more than enough for what I had in mind. We set up the Eleanor Fund, her name, deliberately, a small scholarship scheme for women over 50 starting their own businesses. Not glamorous startups with tech bros and investor decks. Local hairdressers wanting to open their own salon. Carers wanting to set up an agency that actually treated staff decently. Market stall holders ready for a permanent unit. Every year, we give out a handful of grants. Every year, I look at those women and think, asterisk, that's what you should have been. Eleanor, someone who opened doors instead of slamming them. Asterisk. Tom was released not long after Eleanor died. Good behavior. A third off. That sort of thing. Within weeks, the letters started again. Some came to the center. Some to my house. Once, he turned up in person, standing in the car park while security hovered. He'd lost weight. Prison issue haircut. Same eyes. Though, same sense that the world owed him an audience. "I just want to talk," he called, as security walked him back to the gate. "We've been through so much together. Mags, we can fix this." I stood in the doorway and watched him go. I didn't move forward. I didn't wave. I certainly didn't run down the steps into his arms like some terrible film. The staff asked me afterwards if I was all right. I was better than all right. Actually, once the shaking stopped, because this is the bit I want you to hear most. If you've listened this far, the happy ending isn't that he changed. He didn't. The happy ending is that I stopped needing him to. These days, when I drive past the old industrial estate where Davidson Construction used to be, there's a different logo on the wall. New vans. New men in slightly cleaner high-vis. I could have bought that building out of spite. Sometimes I was tempted. Instead, I let it go. I had other things to build. I go home to a house that's quiet in a good way. I work with people who don't lie to me when it's inconvenient to tell the truth. I get to sit with residents having tea, listening to their stories, without thinking about how much their gas bill is costing me or whether they're being a burden. And every so often, usually when I'm sat in my office late with the blinds half drawn and the glow of the center's sign outside, I think about that motorway the day of Eleanor's 78th. Me in my Ford, balloon in the back, house deed on the seat, thinking I could buy my way into being blood family. I didn't find courage. In the end, I found clarity. Once you see clearly that someone will never see you as their equal, you don't really have a choice anymore. You can stay and shrink, or you can leave and grow. That's it. If any of this sounds uncomfortably like your life, I'm not going to tell you to report anyone or blow anything up. I'm just going to ask you one thing. What would clarity look like for you? Not courage, clarity. And once you saw it, what would you do? This story, as ridiculous as it sounds, is inspired by real events. I've changed names, blurred details, kept some things vague to protect people who didn't ask to be part of this. But the pattern, the gatekeeping, the financial control, the sudden you're not really family after decades, that's painfully real. If you recognize it, you're not alone. You can say so in the comments if you like. You'd be surprised how many of us are sitting at similar kitchen tables. And if you want more stories like this, not just about fraud and prison, but about women waking up in the middle of their lives and deciding they've had enough, you know what to do. Hit follow. Stick around. I've got plenty, because my cliffhanger is over. But if you're listening to this thinking, asterisk, this might be my life asterisk, then I'm afraid the next move is yours.